Major themes in the Book of Leviticus. The Book of Leviticus presents a unified vision of how a holy God forms and sustains a holy people. At its core is the theme of holiness, God's own holiness, and the call for His people to reflect that holiness in every dimension of life. The recurring command, "Be holy, for I the Lord your God am holy," functions as the gravitational center of the book. Holiness is not an abstract ideal but a practical reality that shapes worship, ethics, community relationships, and personal conduct. Every instruction, from sacrifices to moral requirements, reflects God's character and His desire for Israel to be distinct in the world. In establishing this holy identity, Leviticus gives sustained attention to sacrifice and atonement, especially through the 5 major offerings and the Day of Atonement. The sacrificial system reveals the seriousness of sin and the necessity of a substitute to restore fellowship between God and humanity. Blood, as the symbol of life, becomes the means of cleansing and reconciliation. These rituals are understood as shadows pointing toward the perfect and once-for-all sacrifice of Christ, who fulfills the meaning of atonement in a way the old system could only anticipate. Closely connected to the sacrificial system is the priesthood, which Leviticus presents as God's appointed means of mediating His presence to the people. Priests are consecrated with great care, demonstrating that access to God is neither casual nor self-determined. Their duties underscore the gap between holy God and sinful humanity, a gap that ultimately bridged by Christ, the true high priest who intercedes on behalf of believers. Through Him, the priestly calling extends to all believers, who are described in the New Testament as a royal priesthood. Another major emphasis is the distinction between the clean and the unclean, a complex system governing food, bodily conditions, disease, and ritual purity. While these laws may appear foreign to modern readers, they symbolized the pervasive effects of sin and the need for constant cleansing in a world touched by death and impurity. Their deeper purpose was to teach Israel to discern between what is holy and what is common, training them to live attentively in the presence of God. These purity laws are often read typologically. They reveal the human condition and point to Christ, who alone has the power to make the unclean clean. Leviticus also connects worship to ethics, particularly in the so-called Holiness Code. Here, moral living, honesty, sexual purity, compassion for the poor, and justice for the vulnerable is inseparable from devotion to God. The command to love your neighbor as yourself, later identified by Jesus as one of the greatest commandments, appears in this context. These moral teachings reflect enduring principles rooted in God's unchanging character, even while the specific ceremonial regulations are understood to be fulfilled in Christ. Underlying all of this is the reality of God's presence dwelling among His people. Because God lives in the midst of Israel, worship must be orderly, and obedience matters deeply. The narrative of Nadab and Abihu, who offer unauthorized fire and suffer the consequences, illustrates the seriousness of approaching God on His terms rather than one's own. The presence of God is both a gift and a call, a gift of nearness and blessing, and a call to reverence, purity, and faithful obedience. Finally, Leviticus places Israel's life within a covenantal framework of blessings and curses. Obedience leads to flourishing, security, and God's favor, while rebellion results in discipline and exile. Yet even judgment is not the final word. God promises that if His people humble themselves and return, He will remember His covenant and restore them. This theme of restoration echoes the broader biblical story of redemption, culminating in the work of Christ. Together, these themes, holiness, sacrifice, priesthood, purity, moral integrity, God's presence, and covenant faithfulness, form a coherent picture. Leviticus portrays a God who is utterly holy yet deeply committed to redeeming and dwelling with His people. The book's rituals and regulations ultimately lead the reader forward to Christ, who embodies holiness, provides atonement, and brings God's presence into the lives of believers in a new and lasting way.